May I ask, do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome?
For a long time, I would say, I have imposter syndrome because there's no one around here that looks like me. Well, then that becomes the reality, right?
Yeah.
The two outcomes are you get the role, you don't get the role. You get the role, great. You don't get it. They're still learning from that. I'm not big on journaling because I'm just not very good at commitment. I start things, stop things, start things, stop things. But I very distinctly remember kind of just having to get a piece of paper and writing down what all the worst case scenarios could be. Okay, the worst case scenario probably is having my name dragged through the press. And I honestly think they were being helpful. But they were like, you need to decide, Anisa, are you going to be career Anisa or are you going to be mummy Anisa?
How would you feel if doing the right thing for your organisation meant making the hardest call of your career? In this episode of View from the Hill, I sit down with Anisa Darr, Executive Director of Finance and Resources at the London Borough of Barnet, a leader who's lived that reality. Anisa and I are going to discuss the challenge of navigating a Section 114 notice, the setbacks she's faced through interview processes, and the moments that tested not just her leadership, but her confidence. Anisa, could you tell me a little bit about your earlier career and what set you up really for success from an early stage?
I joined Barnet in 2007 on the graduate trainee scheme and was really, really fortunate to have people that I think in hindsight believed in me and pushed me and gave me opportunities, not necessarily promotions, but kind of interesting, discrete pieces of work that really helped broaden my experience and exposure. Because actually, if you're quite junior in a finance department in local government, typically 3,000 employees, you see very little and you are mostly, working either in that team on a repetitive piece of work. So I was really lucky that I suppose because I was curious and keen, people spotted that and gave me opportunities. So I would always credit that. And I'm very invested in making sure we all proactively spot talent and spot people who want to do more and give them those opportunities. So that resulted in me gaining more experience than I would have at a point in my career, and therefore applying for things internally mostly and being successful at them. And one of the really interesting things about my career journey is that I think once you've worked with me, you have more confidence that I am credible and I can deliver. And my reflection of my career is whenever I've applied for external roles, I'm much less likely to get them because I just don't think I am able to either convey that confidence or people don't want to take that risk because you see all those other factors like, oh, but you're young, or but you haven't had that much experience, etc. So I think the thing that has been helpful to my career as well is people internally not really being fazed by you need to have done X amount of years, actually knowing that I could do certain things and giving me those opportunities.
Yeah. May I ask, do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome?
Oh, it's really interesting. So I have gone back and forth with that. I would say, I'm going to say no, because I've really had to relearn things that we say to ourselves because I think they hold us back. So actually, I now do not have imposter syndrome, but I absolutely do feel like if I'm in a new place or a new job or a new role or something that I haven't done before, there is a learning curve I go on to start by going, okay, this is unfamiliar. What do I know? What can I draw on from my skill set and toolbox? And what do I need to learn to lean into this and make the best of it?
Yeah.
I think it's too easy for us to say things and then internalize them. And then, you become the thing that you think. So,
Exactly.
So for a long time, I would say, I have imposter syndrome because there's no one around here that looks like me. Well, then that becomes the reality, right?
Yeah.
Then I'm just second guessing myself in that situation. So I've really had to unlearn that. So now I would say no, but of course, symptoms of imposter syndrome, of course, exist. I am nervous going into a situation that I've never been in before, but that's completely normal and everyone feels that.
And you're conscious of it, you've got techniques to help to manage it, and that
think
sort of
so.
self-confidence
Yeah.
comes through. I've suffered from it as well in my, suffered, it's not an illness, but
But that's what I mean. It's the way we talk to ourselves about these
Exactly.
things, and then you think, well,
But
no.
I've changed my narrative over probably about the past year or so, and feel so much more confident because of that. And you are right, it's that narrative you tell yourself, it's what you tell others.
And it's what society tells us.
Yeah,
Society
exactly
tells
that.
us we probably have imposter syndrome, we should have it, and then you think, maybe I have imposter syndrome.
Well, we haven't got it anymore, so we're good. But I think the way that you're probably inspiring everybody in your council and those that know you around, in and around work, you must be having such an impact on people, women getting into finance, for example, and getting to leadership position like you're in. I think it's really inspiring.
Thank you.
So in addition to the day job, you're also the president of the Society of London Treasurers. So tell us a bit about how you got into that position and how you balance that with your role at Barnet.
So Society of London Treasurers, I have to say, is this incredible society which includes all of the 32 London boroughs plus the component bits of the GLA. And actually, when I joined it, I remember being super intimidated. So the meetings happen, I think it's every 6 weeks or 2 months at Guildhall. And there's an agenda, there's meetings when you join, there's a pack that comes out, there's I think there's a constitution, or there's like quite a lot of governance around it. And I remember turning up, making my way, this is post-COVID, so everything is in person, going from the office in North London to Guildhall, making my way there. And I remember as I was on the train, pretty much approaching central London, or Moorgate rather, I could tell I was going to be 10 minutes late. And I remember being so overwhelmed about the thought of like walking in late as this newbie. I went home. I didn't turn up.
Did you?
Yeah. I was like super intimidated. And now when I think about that, I just think that's absolutely mad, because actually it's an evolving group. They're not the same people. But it's been such a important source of like inspiration and friendship and support. It makes me laugh that is what my experience is. But I'm quite keen to talk about it, because I'm sure other people will feel like that about spaces that have existed for ages that they either haven't seen themselves in or have never been before, and just not turning up because I can't possibly turn up late. Like everyone will be looking at me and the rest of it. So they're a great bunch. How did I get into it? So, some of the processes are still quite old. So it's not, presidents aren't voted in. You get your turn by being on SLT as a permanent continuous service member. You could move around different London boroughs, but there should be no break in service. Yeah. So I guess my time came, essentially. I can't really, pretend like there was a democratic process behind it. But I've been really, really surprised by actually how much I've enjoyed it. So it's not just kind of, it's been a really interesting year for local government finance in terms of fair funding review, business rates revaluation, business rates reset, et cetera, et cetera. So just that ability to be able to see some of those things forming and having those conversations with government and various parts of the country has been just really interesting, and just like a real insight into how much more happens on a day-to-day level than I maybe would have appreciated.
Thank you for that. So just going back to the Anisa that didn't go in through the door on that first day at Guildhall, what would your advice be to yourself, with the benefit of hindsight? What would you have said to yourself back then, and how would you inspire others to actually make the step through the door?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because this is not a criticism of anyone back then, but because I know that about myself all those years ago, make an extra effort to make sure people that are new, like I connect with them, find out if they're okay, check in with them, just so they don't feel like it's a completely unfamiliar space that they're coming into. One of the things, and I can't take credit for this, so it was like my predecessor's predecessor started, is having a much closer working relationship with the deputies group. So actually, if you are then coming from the deputies group to SLT, like as in progressing, it's not a completely unfamiliar place, and you know the people and the place and the personalities, and it's not super intimidating.
Yeah,
so
softer landing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Just demystifying it a bit. I think the thing that I was really nervous about was just this, oh my God, this space that exists, and it just is quite formal, and it isn't.
You can put it on on pedestal in ways, can't you? That sort of experience, you think, gosh, that's so above me, and I'm just down here, why me kind of thing. But you were put into that role for a really good reason, and it sounds like you're really enjoying it and thriving in it. So happy to hear it. Could I come back to something you said earlier about some of the roles you've gone for externally in your career so far? you haven't been successful for whatever reason. Tell us a bit about how you build resilience through those periods of not being successful, either with a job interview or with a piece of work or something. How do you, as a leader, how do you keep yourself, resilient through setbacks?
I mean, I'm really glad that you've touched on that, because on the outside, if you didn't know that about me, that I had gone for certain jobs and I hadn't got them, it's quite easy to see my career as I entered local government in 2007 as a trainee. I became Section 151 officer in 2017. So, it took me a decade to kind of get from trainee to Section 151 officer. All of that sounds incredible and impressive. And, it is.
Which it is.
However, what you can't see is all the things that I went for in between that I didn't get. And I think that's really important to kind of draw the curtain and let people see, because it's, comparison is the worst thing people do to themselves. And it's quite easy to compare yourself to someone else and go, well, actually, that's what success looks like. That is what is, because that's what's set out in front of you. But actually,
I think we're all guilty of that as well, aren't we?
But that wasn't success for me. Actually, I happen to be, in some cases, it is right place, right time. And so, that opportunity became available. And sometimes people have been in an internal organization for years and years and years, and an opportunity doesn't become available. So I think it's very important, I feel, to talk about things where they don't go quite to plan. So I remember going for a head of service role in a neighbouring borough, not getting it. And actually, it's really funny. Then 5 years later, meeting the Section 151 officer who'd interviewed me, and he was like, I always knew you'd get far. I was like, why didn't you give me the job?
Why didn't you pick me then?
But actually, in hindsight, if I'd got that job, I wouldn't have got the Section 151
exactly
officer
that,
role.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
All happened for the right reasons.
Exactly. So having lived through that, I now know, and I absolutely believe in my core, that every opportunity I don't get, there will be a reason for it.
Yeah.
So I'm good. However, in the moment, because we are human, being rejected also really sucks. And I think it's really important to give yourself space and time and, to just lick your wounds almost and be like, actually, I think I would have been good at that, but it is what it is. And I also think it's really important to, when you talked about not getting an interview. So it's really important to get feedback, because actually the two outcomes are you get the role, you don't get the role. You get the role, great. You don't get it, they're still learning from that. So don't be embarrassed or don't hold yourself back from not still asking for feedback, because I think that's where the learning is. And actually, sometimes I get the feedback and I think, well, there's nothing more I could have done. Actually, they were just a better candidate, or they just had more rounded experience. And that's okay too. And so I think it's okay also to kind of go, I didn't get that role, I still think I was the best candidate.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all depends on the competition.
And who they want at that point in time.
Exactly.
And also trust that if you didn't get it, it really isn't the space and place for you in that point in your career.
So do you have any practical tips or practical advice for aspirant S151 officers in the sector, or any other leader really, to stay motivated? And what things do you think people can be doing behind the scenes to prime themselves in the best possible way to get that next step up?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to... It's really important to know the role. So the what, it's important, people say it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think it's really important to know the stuff, the technical aspects of it, the leadership aspect of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's really important who you know. So build your network. You should know the people before you go into that room. It's really hard to judge a candidate just on how they present themselves in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And of course, at that level, you do have assessment centers and you have a stakeholder panel and you have all the rest of it. And that is absolutely because it is really hard to judge someone on one interview. So people want to get a rounded view of you. But what can you do to help yourself before that? Normally, recruitment agencies will say, you can have an informal chat with the chief exec. Make sure you take up those opportunities. Even if you end up not going for the role, it's an opportunity for you to get your face out there. It's an opportunity for you to get to know the borough better, the person you're working with better. So I would say all of that's really, really important. And then just don't get so obsessed with where you want to be that you lose the joy in what you're doing.
Yeah,
so I
that's
think
a really good
sometimes
tip.
you end up chasing the title. And some of that is to luck, right? Like the role has to become vacant or etc. And it may take years, but don't then lose the joy in what you're doing where you are because you're just so obsessed with getting to the next step. Yeah, that will come. Trust that, believe that, do all the right things, build your experience portfolio network, but also just enjoy what you're doing at the time.
Enjoy life at the same time.
Yeah.
How do you feel about mentors? Do you use a mentor? Have you ever worked with a mentor? And could that be a good technique to have that relationship with somebody to help someone get to the next level, in your opinion?
I think mentors are really, really important. I would say I've had more informal mentors than mentors because I really, really appreciate the breadth of views. Like, I don't necessarily think you need to have a mentor, they give you a reflection and you agree with it and follow that path. Actually, the benefit of that reflection is for you to then go, what element of that do I agree with? But it's just useful to have a sounding board. I think mentors are really important. I don't necessarily think you need to have one mentor and have a long-term relationship. I actually think just using people's experience for different things is helpful. So you could have a mentor for, I really like the way I think you balance your work life. Tell me more about that. I really like the way you lead in challenging situations. Talk to me about that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think you don't have to go to one person about all aspects that you're struggling with. You could see something that you think, wow, like you've handled that really well. And you just kind of get advice from them on that specific thing. I think that's really good.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, Anisa, I'm aware that Barnet Council submitted an S114 notice in January this year. Could you tell us a bit about how you navigated that?
Yes. So I was on mat leave for 2024. And in the period that I was off, so the person that was covering my role, who is a very dear friend, got in contact and kind of said, Anisa, can I just check in with you about a couple of things? Yeah, kind of like, I remember at the time, Sophie was about 6 months or something. And I was like, may have to have him like in a wrap because he doesn't sleep very well. But yeah, we can do this. Anyway, so I remember having that conversation very, very distinctly. And he said to me, Anisa, do you remember signing off this payment? And I was like, well, no, but the fact that you're asking me must mean that I've signed it off. So I must have. And he was like, yeah, okay. So I think you have. Anyway, turns out you're not allowed to do this. And I was like, oh, okay. And of course, there's like layers you go through before you sign something off. And it was just, so at a point in time while I was on maternity leave, it was very, very clear to me that, and the specifics of it are documented in the Section 114 notice for anyone that is interested. They can absolutely go and read it. And I won't do it a disservice by trying to summarize it because I'll do a terrible job. And I don't want to minimize the enormity of it or the seriousness of it as well. However, I think useful to talk about kind of my perspective on that, because we will all come across things where we have undertaken action or done something where, you can only ever act with the best information you have at that point in time. And subsequently, if there's new information and that it wasn't the right decision, what do you do? And I suppose in my situation, I was kind of like, well, ultimately the buck stops with me. So while there are layers of assurance that I would have relied on for it to have got to me and for me to have approved it, etc. Actually, what I need to do is realize that the buck does stop with me. So my approach to it was, okay, what's the worst case scenario? And I remember, so I'm not big on journaling because I'm just not very good at commitment. I start things, stop things. But I very distinctly remember kind of just having to get a piece of paper and writing down what all the like worst case scenarios could be and kind of going, okay, I could live with all of these things. Like if I got the sack, fine. I could get another job. I may not get the job I want, but I could get another job. And like, I remember distinctly thinking, okay, the worst case scenario probably is like having my name dragged through the press because that's so uncontrollable. And while local government finance can seem not very interesting, pension funds are a very emotive word. And so, I just had to literally think about even the most wildest scenarios, but kind of going, that could happen. And how would I feel? And would I be okay? So I guess that was the only scenario that I wrote down that I was like, oh, that would be horrible because The internet never forgets. But with all the other scenarios, I was like, okay, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, but this is all manageable. This is all good. This is okay. It was a time where it was really important for me to reach out to my network, to my, just to use them as a sounding board and kind of go. And it was really lovely for people to go, that really sucks, because it really sucks. And actually, people can't really help you or solve the situation, but it's just really great to have someone go, oh,
just
that's
to
horrible.
hear your personal
And what was
perspective.
really nice is sometimes people were quite empathetic and were like, this could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
That was nice. So I guess, when things go wrong or when a situation seems outside of your control, it's quite easy for us to be embarrassed, not talk about it, go into ourselves. And actually what I found is talking about it, because it wasn't great, but it's happened. I can't change the past. You just have to own it and move forward. I think it's also really important, I think, in my experience at the time, to be realistic. So I absolutely could have lost my job, but that's the reality of these jobs. And there was no point me going into that situation in a combative way, kind of going, it's not my fault. I shouldn't, this is what you get paid for, like as in to provide the assurance, to have the governance framework in, et cetera, et cetera. So when things go wrong, while it may not have been you specifically, it is you. So so that was another thing that I thought would be better for my mental health as well, just to kind of go, yeah, that's fine. I will own this because ultimately I have to. I think that's the grown-up thing to do. And I found it quite easy to deal with it once I'd kind of made peace with all of those things. Yeah. I think it was also really important. Like I do have to say I had really supportive people around me. Just in terms of everyone, the range of people were really supportive. Which I know isn't always necessarily the case with other people. But I think also reaching out to those people who were in that decision-making role, so like I guess my boss and like politicians, and just kind of being upfront about, okay, this has happened. Like, how do we deal with this collectively, together, right? Yeah. Because there's no point me kind of going, okay, well, this is the best scenario for me, so this is the outcome I want. Like, how are we going to make this happen? That's just not the reality of it. So I think I really had to dig deep. I think it was really important to kind of go, okay, I'm clearly such a process geek, but like, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, I'm okay with most of these things. This is not going to be okay. And then once I condensed it to, okay, there's just one outcome I'm not okay with, it didn't feel so overwhelming. Yeah. It was kind of like, okay, so this one thing could happen and that would be terrible, but all the rest I could live with. We could survive.
I think that's a really healthy way of managing the process, because actually, being on maternity leave and being faced with that is something most people on maternity leave probably wouldn't have to deal with. But it sounds like you took it in your stride. It wasn't ideal by any stretch, but I think the fact that you tackled it head on is really admirable. And
thank you.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would say is I definitely didn't do it thinking I was doing something admirable. So like, you just have to put one foot in front of the other. And in hindsight, I think I am proud of myself. Also recognizing the situation, the steps that led up to it were steps I was involved in as well. But I kind of feel like you can only learn from these things. And I feel like I have learned. And so that's important. And that's it.
Amazing. Could you tell us a bit about the differences between the Section 114 notice that Barnet issued versus perhaps any others that have been issued in government?
Yeah, so this was news to me as well, because obviously the only Section 114 notice that most people in the sector are aware of is the one which has to be issued when you can't balance your budget and, colloquially known as being bankrupt, etc. There are two parts. There's a part A to the Section 114 and there's part B. Part B relates to unlawful payment. So this was in relation to unlawful payment.
Right, got you. Okay. So, Anisa, you mentioned that you've been on maternity leave fairly recently. Tell me a bit more about your kids quickly. I mean, how many children do you have, and what was it like returning to work, once you'd had your child?
So I had, before we talk about maternity leave, the thing I want to say is I don't often hear people, men or women, in quote unquote successful careers, talk about their children apart from like an inconvenience in terms of like I had to do the school run or this or that. But like they are such a source of joy and grounding to my life. It is just unreal. Like I have been a better version of myself and have unlearned so many like toxic learned behaviors as a result of having them. And, you know, being a millennial parent with, you know, some level of privilege and the mental bandwidth, etc. I'm very committed to like gentle parenting. But actually when you're like negotiating with your child about whether they're going to put their coat on and like 1 degree, you're like, no, just put your coat on. Why is this a conversation? But like, you know, it really makes you have to dig deep and like find resilience and influence and negotiating, which absolutely translates to like work life as well. Yeah. Because you're like, am I really respect the hierarchy, just do what I'm telling you to do. But actually that's probably the least effective way of communicating, right? So like, it's very interesting how, like I learn more from them sometimes and being with them, which is very interesting. But yeah, like, so return. So, and I think that's really important because I feel like when I did return from maternity leave, so I've had 2 sets of maternity leave, 6 years apart, and like content warning between those maternity leaves, I also had a miscarriage at like 14 weeks. So I had a period of a time off for that as well. And the reason I raise it because I actually think as an organization or as a society, we're better at dealing with grief than we are dealing with maternity leave, which is very bizarre. But, you know, we'll come back to that. But like when I first came back after I had Noah, I remember a colleague at the same level as me, so an exec director saying, and I honestly think they were being helpful, but they were like, you need to decide, Anisa, are you going to be career Anisa or are you going to be mummy Anisa? And I remember thinking, yeah, okay, I need to think about that. But then I was like, no, I want to be both. Like, why is this a choice? I don't understand. But I really think they were being helpful. So in his mind, I mean, he was older than me. And that's the life he believed to be true. And I just think, I mean, it was pre-COVID as well. So it was 2019 that I went back to work and I was at work 5 days a week, which people didn't realize. Like, again, I just don't think we're very good at dealing with people coming back from maternity leave at senior level. So no one had communicated that I was back or that I was back 5 days a week or that, you know, people were very confused about the back. And then the person who was covering me on an interim basis, they hadn't been told when they were leaving, which was also very bizarre to me. And then there was a notion of maybe they'll stay and do other stuff. And I was like, okay, but what stuff? Like, that's very confusing for the organization because
and for you.
Because I am the CFO, but they were the CFO. And then how does that work? And so it was very interesting. And I remember having a conversation with the person who was my maternity leave cover. And they were kind of going, oh, I understand that there might be some sensitivities around like me. And I was like, no. Like, as in you have done my role in organizations, explain to me how this works, that we're both here. Yeah. And they were really respectful of that. And they were like, no, you're right. And they kind of left themselves. But like, it shouldn't be for me to have had that conversation with them or for them to have decided independently. Like, it should have been for the organization to manage that, right? So I thought that was just fascinating. I was like, what is going on here? This is so weird.
Have there been any learnings from that experience? Is that something that...
I would hope so. Definitely for me. I mean, and so then when I went on maternity leave this time and came back, like different bosses and slightly different CMTs, but absolutely a completely different process. I mean, ignoring the fact that I came back to a Section 114, which I think is worse, but you know, it was definitely, I think, better managed. I think I was more assertive as well. I think I was more clearer about what I wanted. So, you know, I can't really just... I think that's the other thing. Like, I think my expectation was this would just happen, and knowing it doesn't just happen, I think I was clearer on communicating what I wanted. So that was good. The difference in 6 years, I mentioned that as well because that doesn't seem like a very long time, but actually attitudes change quite quickly. So I remember coming back from mat leave the first time round and someone, it was a guy saying, oh, and what have you done with your baby? And I remember thinking, okay, my bar for if it's a sexist question or not is my husband being asked this question? And my husband is absolutely never being asked where his children are when he's at work. Like, just assume we have put our child in a safe space.
Yeah.
Like, just assume we've not abandoned our children. And I just remember thinking that's such a weird question. And I like.
So I think there's still a stigma, isn't there, in society attached to women that return to work or people that return to work after having a child. And you're right. People don't often get asked,
So
husbands
weird.
and partners don't get asked the same things. And I noticed that because I've gone and had a child. I've got a 2-year-old boy and returned to work a year ago. And my partner doesn't seem to get asked anything about his child, our child, sorry. And it's interesting, isn't it? So perhaps...
So like the expectation is still there for like the mother to have most of the caring load. I mean, we know in reality that may be the case. I have a very, very, very supportive husband, very supportive, informal and formal caring network. So actually like the nursery that my baby goes to, he's not a baby. He's like 20 months. It's just the most wonderful place ever. And I wouldn't be able to do all the different aspects of my life without them as well. And I just think sometimes we don't give enough credit to like formal caring networks out there because either they're taken for granted or they're not valued or whatever. Like they are amazing, as are my parents, my in-law, like everyone who chips in is incredible. And I am very lucky to have that set up. However, I still think on balance, even if it's like 1% more, I do like maybe carry the mental load more. So even though that's the reality of it, the expectation for that to be the case is still really annoying.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say? It takes a village to raise a child.
It does take a village.
And it really does.
Takes a village.
And I know that. I mean, I moved from London to the East Midlands and don't have immediate family around me. And if it wasn't for a really great nursery and an even better childminder, I wouldn't be able to work full time in quite a fast-paced job. So I understand but there is still a mental load attached to it as a mother.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to share some reflections together there. Let's talk about funding next. You've mentioned fairer funding. Tell us a bit about what that means to you in practice, and why are there disparities across the sector?
Yeah. So I really wish they hadn't called it fairer funding. I feel very triggered by like the fairer as part in the funding. Like there is a finite pot of money which they are trying to distribute differently because the allocation method was very outdated. Absolutely. It was never intended to last for 13 years. It's ended up maybe even longer than 13 years. But, it's ended up staying the same for a really long time. So what current government has done is absolutely gripped the fact that things need to change, need is distributed differently, and the funding formula needs to reflect that, absolutely. But the reality of it is we are still allocating less money than is needed in communities to support them well and adequately. And so it's never going to totally be fair because it's never going to reflect the need. I mean, in terms of disparities, data is only ever going to be as good as the limitations. So ultimately, government has to rely on something, and so that's fine. Kind of can be pragmatic about that. But fundamentally, I just think there is not enough resources to recognise the needs in different communities.
Yeah. I think in local government generally, of course, you're always up against it in terms of available funding, having to deliver more for less, bigger service areas that have greater need for more funding. How do you sort of stay mentally resilient as a leader when budgets are just getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed?
I think, honestly, focusing on outcomes. So we deliver great outcomes for residents. I don't want to rely on inspections, but I guess it's an objective, quantifiable way of saying, our people think we're good. So, we've got good in Ofsted, we've got good in our CQC inspection, we've just been awarded C1 in social housing by the Social Housing Regulator. And that is absolutely down to the dedication and hard work of all those thousands of individuals that work across the organisations. I happen to be a resident of the borough I worked in only as of 2021. And, I'm sure there are missed bin connections. I've never had a missed bin collection. People
You'll get one next week.
No, people work so hard. I cannot overstate that. And so, yes, it's really, really hard. But what we do really matters and is important. And I don't just mean that as Barnet, but I mean that as local government. We really are invested in supporting people. We look at how we can support people into employment. We look at skills, we look at schools, we look at mental health. Like, honestly, if that's not the thing that gives you joy, I don't know what is. So while we absolutely have to see how we are squaring the circle all the time in terms of funding and outcomes, actually sometimes taking some time out and focusing on the outcomes is really important. Like my chief exec always talks about like going back. It's not quite going back to the floor, but it's the thing that, as you progress in leadership, sometimes you have to let go of the things that actually really speak to you or you want to do. And it's kind of, how do you take a day to go back to, like, if you're a DAS and the thing that gave you joy was meeting carers or, spending time with children, like go back and do that just to reconnect with the why, which I think is really important.
Yeah. In part of my role, interview, lots of people across government and meet lots of people in local gov, and quite often you'll hear people that, chief execs going out on bin round collections or going out and actually meeting communities. And I think you're right. I think it's so important to stay connected and see the human impact that you're making, regardless of what level you're at.
Agree.
What's your view on commercial opportunities in local government, either particularly in Barnet or broadly across the whole sector?
I think it's important for us to continuously evolve. Like, the world around us is not stopping. So like if you someone said this to me once, and it was fascinating because they talked about a time where you'd come to work and the technology you used was so cutting edge compared to what you had at home, and now the stuff you have at home is so much more advanced than when you come to work. So that's really interesting in terms of a reflection of, like, people wouldn't have had computers at home, but they had computers at work, and so actually you came to work and it was more. So it's not necessarily just commercialization, but I think innovation, not for the sake of innovation, but for the sake of achieving better outcomes or increasing productivity, is really, really important. And we should embrace it, and we should, in a safe way, think about how we adopt those things, not necessarily be trailblazers if that's not where we think our role is, but definitely evolving and not staying the same. Like, we talk about this all the time, and it's probably really boring, but residents are used to kind of having an app on their phone where they're always logged in and they can buy something at the, like, literally click of a button. That's it. That's how easy it is, and it'll arrive tomorrow. And actually, in terms of having to navigate how they communicate with the council, with, this one single entity about maybe 4 things, there's 4 different routes into it. Like, that can and is frustrating.
You can see the frustration, can't you, on behalf of the
And it's
resident.
not necessarily that we have to completely mimic the private sector, but actually just making it easier for people who need us to be able to get in touch with us or access the right organisation. Sometimes they're coming to us and all we're doing is signposting. Well, how do we make that better, quicker?
Slicker and quicker,
Exactly. So I think I'm going to broaden it from commercialisation, because I don't think it's just about that. I think it's about innovation. I think if the motivation isn't right, we will get bad outcomes. So when you think about places like Thurrock and Woking, the motivation for commercialisation was reduced resources. Actually, we didn't have, or they didn't have, I mean, it's bad governance too, so I don't want to, skirt over that. But the reason some of them did those things was because they didn't have funding to meet their requirements. And so I think if you're doing it because you're just doing it for the money, or you're just doing it for a certain outcome, which isn't to do with we want to get better outcomes, you're going to pursue the wrong thing, and you're going to take shortcuts. And I just think...
And you can end up in a worse situation, can't you, overall? Great. Thank you. At Tower Hill, we are public sector recruiters through and through. So we are really committed to only working with public sector organisations. It's literally what runs through our core. And our employer value proposition internally is to love the impact that you make. So we always talk about the impact that we've made on clients, candidates, communities, and anyone else internally as well. So it's really, really important to us. So on that note, I'd really like to ask you a question relating to that from your career. So when you reflect on your public sector career to date, what one thing stands out the most to you about the impact that you've made somewhere that you're most proud of?
The question makes me think about, so last month was Black History Month, and the theme was standing firm in your power. And a few London councils worked together to host Candice Brathwaite, who is an author. I think she has a podcast as well. And, you know, she's a social media personality, etc. But I don't want to minimize her by saying that's all she does. She does various things. And she was talking a little bit about, you know, joy being resistance and like not feeling fatigued by kind of the sometimes the endlessness of things you have to work against. And it made me reflect on the fact that actually sometimes existing is impact, and actually sometimes just being is the impact that I want. Like I sometimes think feeling the pressure of representation is too much for one person, and that shouldn't be your only motivation to be somewhere if it isn't fulfilling you as a person. I think that's too much responsibility. But you know, as long as it kind of aligns with where you want to be in life, with your values, etc., that's quite a privileged place to be as well. So yeah, I would hope that my impact is sometimes just being in spaces, places, and conversations that someone that doesn't look like me has been in or is, or, you know, so providing that representation is important, and I hope I do a good job of it, because, you know, it is also quite easy to not do a good job of it. So yeah,
I'm sure you do an excellent job. But alongside all of that, it's, you know, sounds like you've got a good sort of oversight of your personal life and your work life, and I'm sure you want to make the same impact at home as you do in your job as well. And just being mindful of you as a whole person, that sort of holistic impact that you have on everyone that you know and touch. I think it's lovely to hear.
But I feel like that's been the learning. So I don't think I've always got it right. I don't think I've probably got it right now. But just being mindful of it, as you said, is really important.
It's a work in progress.
Work in progress, yeah. Always rebalancing.
Yeah, absolutely. Anisa, it's been absolutely lovely spending time with you today. Thank you for coming in and sharing your views on life in local government as a leader and as a mum as well.
Thank you.
Really nice to hear your
Loved
reflections. And yeah, we really look forward to sort of working with you in the future and seeing your career flourish and continue.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This has been less nerve-wracking than I thought.
Good. Thank you again. At Tower Hill, we work with leaders like Anisa, the very people who are shaping the future of the public sector. We're passionate about connecting talented people with organisations that make a real difference. So if you're a leader looking for your next opportunity, or an organisation looking for support in finding the right people, we'd love to hear from you. You can find out more about us at tile-hill.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn to see how we can help support you in your career. Until next time, we'll see you on the other side of the hill.